Hi. Hey guys, what's up? My name is Dom. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, I typically make bookish content, movie content, and anything else in between because I like to do whatever I want on this channel, and tonight's going to be bookish content. We are a quarter of the way through the year, and you know what? I might as well be making a quarterly wrap-up because I have 2 months worth of books to talk about, so I'm combining my February and March wrap-up. We have a ton of books to talk about, more than usual. I was able to read quite a bit actually, so we're just gonna jump right into it. And some of these books I have a lot more to say than others, so hopefully this goes well. So the first book I'm going to talk about is a manga, and that is Death Note Short Stories, story by Tsugumi Ohba and art by Takashi Obata. So this is just a bunch of short stories in the Death Note universe, which is a manga series I read last year. If you don't know what Death Note's about, it is about a boy named Light Yagami who was bored, and then one day he's walking and comes across something called a Death Note, and he discovers that when you write someone's name in the Death Note, they die. So then he takes it upon himself to become the god of a new world. These short stories were written throughout the year, so they're not necessarily cohesive, which it kind of shows. It's just anything they wrote in one book for you to read. I give this 3.5 out of 5 stars. The actual manga series is definitely a lot better. However, I did like the one that takes place in 2019 because the person is arguably morally better than Light Yagami, but in the original Death Note series, Ryuk does say whoever uses the Death Note is doomed. And it does, and they still keep up with that theme in this. And then I did enjoy the pilot. I guess at one point before the original series was actually written, these authors submitted the pilot, and it was just interesting to see how their original idea evolved into the Death Note we know today. And yeah, that's really all I gotta say about it. As much as I like the original manga series better, I do recommend reading this just so you can get more of a feel of the story, and if you're going through like a withdrawal, this would be good to solve that. However, not my favorite. Next we have a book called Sempre, and this is by J.M. Darhauer. This is a mafia romance book, so it's about a girl named, not Hazel, Haven. She is sold into this mafia family and falls in love with the son, and it's essentially their adventures from there. This was quite a story that took me way too long to read. This review is going to be kind of a mess because it felt, the book itself I don't want to say is messy, it's just my thoughts on it are very messy. First and foremost, I know the plot itself sounds problematic. I'm not going to get into the implications of that because it's a mafia love story. You should know what you're getting into when it comes to a mafia love story. I was well aware I was probably going to be reading some fucked up shit. So the plot itself doesn't really faze me. Moving on. I actually have a love-hate relationship with our couple. It's Haven and... fuck, what is his name? Is it Marco? No, that's his last, DeMarco is his last name. Carmine. So one of the tropes it relies on is one character falling in love with their savior. That trope I don't mind. I'm kind of a sucker for that trope. However, the trope I do hate is when someone falls in love with their life partner and it's like the first person they've ever met. So Carmine is the first boy Haven has ever had like romantic feelings for, and the whole thing is already how they're star-crossed lovers, are lovers for life. I don't know if it's because I'm jaded, you know, from my past and, you know, not marrying the people I thought I was gonna marry when I was 15, what have you. I think they're 17 in this book. Maybe it's because I'm jaded, but it's also maybe because I'm too realistic for this. At one point I just wanted to tell Haven, like, you know, it's okay to make friends, like, you're 17, you'll meet other people. I wanted her to kind of grow into her own person. That's one of the problems I have with this trope. It's like, I feel like those characters don't have room to grow and be their own person. So much of their identity relies on Carmine, which granted was actually challenged in this book. There was a character who was asking Haven, like, are you sure? Hey. But still, it was just Haven's responses, and she herself wasn't really growing into where I wanted her to grow. So I think that's where some of my issues lie. However, again, love-hate relationship. One of the things I love about this couple, I am a sucker for problematic characters who do anything to save the person they love. And Carmine is like that. He is a fucked up kid with a past. I just love when characters that are just not necessarily morally good do anything they can for that one person. So, I don't know, I guess 2 things I love, 1 thing I hate. On the topic of love, I did like seeing the love our characters have for other people. Like the dad Vincent, I love seeing the love he had for his late wife Moira, and it was actually fun reading throughout the book when they weren't focused on just Haven and, I want to keep calling him Marco, Carmine. The author would also focus on the mafia itself, and those chapters I actually really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the chapters that explore the dynamics of the mafia more so than our love story. In my January wrap-up, where I did mention part of this book, I did mention something about a plot twist. I was scared. There was one plot twist I was expecting, and I was going to be so scared it was going to happen. Rest assured, it did not happen. However, what the plot twist ended up being, I was really angry that I didn't see it coming because it's just so obvious. It just makes too much sense. So I'm mad at myself for not seeing that coming. I grew up Italian American. Our characters are Italian American, so it was really fun just recognizing the Italian American culture. And the book takes place in both North Carolina and Chicago. So North Carolina is where Vincent took his family to essentially hide, but the mafia itself is in Chicago, so Vincent always goes back. And it was really cool just recognizing the places he was going to. I felt like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme. However, I did have some nitpicks with that, but that is just me being nitpicky and someone like from Chicago, so I notice things no one else is going to notice. And that's totally on me and not the author. For one thing that like kind of bothered me, it was the way she would talk about Chicago neighborhoods. They weren't described as Chicago neighborhoods, they were more so described as suburbs. For example, Celia, the aunt, she lives in Portage Park. And the author would, and maybe I just read it totally wrong and this wasn't the author's intention, but she would describe Portage Park as its own separate town. But it's not a town, it's one of Chicago's neighborhoods. So Celia's address is not going to be Portage Park, Illinois. It's going to be Chicago, Illinois. And then another nitpick I have, and again, like nothing against the author because there's no way she would know this. She mentions Mount Carmel Cemetery, which I am well aware what cemetery that is. Some of my family's buried there. Like every Italian American of Chicago has family buried there. Fucking Al Capone is there. But Vincent goes visits his wife there, and it was just, he made a comment about how he's going to be buried there next to her when she died. And I'm sitting there like, no, you're not, because Mount Carmel's not accepting new people because they actually ran out of space. They don't have plot space left. But again, there's no way for the author to know that. That's just like a funny nitpick to me. And now to you, because of course I want to talk about it in my wrap-up. All that mess to say, my final gripe with this book is that there was no reason this story needed to be 530 pages long. It felt like multiple books in one. There were chapters where I felt like they weren't needed. Like I know like character development and establishing and embellishing their relationship. Like I get that. But she did that enough in other chapters that like half of these just felt like filler. And like it felt like she was given a word count and she was trying to reach that. And it made for an awkward pacing. Some of these chapters were really fast paced. Some of them I couldn't wait for them to be done. And it's like, we get it. They love each other. I know, you said that 3 chapters ago, and because some of these, and that's the other thing with some of these chapters, it felt like I was reading the same thing over and over again, but I think this book easily could have been like 300 pages. That being said, I'm still seated for the sequel. I have plans to read the sequel this month in April. It's called Redemption, and it is shorter. It's 416 pages, and I ended up giving the book 3 stars. As many gripes as I have, I still was entertained, and I was able to sit through it, so it deserves its 3 stars. Moving on. So the next book I read is another manga, and that is Demon Slayer Volume 1 by Koyoharu Gotoge. This series is about a boy named Tanjiro whose sister Nezuko is turned into a demon, so he becomes a demon slayer and is spending the rest of the series trying to find a way to turn Nezuko back into a human. I am caught up in the anime. My friends have been begging me to start this series, so I thought, why not? I will say I am kind of liking the anime better. I did give this, as much as I love the anime because I love the characters, I give this volume only 3 stars. I still adore this concept. Granted, I've consumed better stories, but I love the characters so much, and I still enjoy the concept. However, the pacing in this is very choppy, and I thought the anime helped fill that out. It has a gripping first chapter, however, the rest of this volume feels like the author didn't really know where she wanted the story to go, and she was kind of just writing as she was thinking. Like, I guess the perfect way to sum this up is that it does read, like writing wise, it does read like a first draft. An exceptional first draft, but I think more editing could have been done. That being said, I do love the artwork of Demon Slayer. I understand the artwork of the manga is a hit or miss for a lot of people because it's not great. Like, I've definitely seen better. However, her artwork kind of gives me like sketchbook vibes. Like, you can almost see the scratches of her pen in some of these panels. And I kind of adore that. So I'm all for the artwork despite it not being super popular with people. And that sums up my opinions on this volume. So then next I read was Demon Slayer Volume 2. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It does still read like the author's still trying to find her footing. However, she does have a better grasp of the story in this volume, and we also finally get to meet the villain. And the way he was introduced was so subtle, and I'm kind of obsessed with the tiny detail. Like, it wasn't a grand reveal, and I think that was a clever way to go about it. If you want to set yourself apart from other stories, you have to do it. Sometimes you have to do it in the smallest ways. Next is also another doozy, and it's going to be long and messy like sempre, and that is Becoming Free Indeed, My Story of Disentangling Faith from Fear by Ginger Duggar Vuolo. So if you don't know who Ginger Duggar is, she is one of 19 children. The Duggar family was part of a show on TLC called 19 Kids and Counting. Her family is part of the IBLP cult. They're fundamentalist evangelicals. Her family got famous for their wholesome Christian values. A whole bunch of shit went down where a lot of people found out they weren't very wholesome in the slightest. I forgot what year it was, but while I was still in high school, it got out that her brother did molest 5 girls, 4 which were her siblings. She was unfortunately one of the victims. And then a couple years ago, that same brother got arrested by federal marshals for possession of child sexual assault material, and he is currently in prison, and he's serving until like 2036. So she is from a doozy of a family. They were part of this Gothard cult. Bill Gothard is the leader of IBLP, or was the leader. That's a whole thing too. She married Jeremy Vuolo, and now they are part of the MacArthur Church. Which is a whole other thing, and I will get to that, but she decided to write this autobiography about how she became free. That is a long-winded introduction to who Ginger Duggar is, and like oh my god, I follow Duggar Snark, so I know way too much about this family. That being said, let's talk about the book. This whole book I was actually, admittedly intrigued by, not because of who Ginger Duggar is, but the main premise of this book is that she brings up deconstruction versus disentangling. Deconstruction, in Ginger's view, are people who were very religious and then essentially lost their religion. They were thinking about their religion, became atheists. She is disentangling from her religion, so she believed one thing, thought about it, but is still religious. And she mentions in her book that doesn't happen very often, so she wanted to provide a new point of view. I was like, you know what? That's a valid point, and I'm really intrigued by what you have to say, so I want to read this book. And not only that, because Duggar Snark has a bunch of opinions on this book without actually reading it, and I understand they don't want to like give her money or anything, so when I saw it was available at the library, I snagged it because I did want to read it and form my own opinion on it, and didn't want to rely on a bunch of strangers on the internet telling me what to think, especially because all of us are going into this book with some sort of bias. If you're a fan of Ginger Duggar, you'll probably more likely like this book. If you're like me, who's on fucking Duggar Snark, you probably don't like her, so you're going in with a type of bias. So admittedly, I was reading this with a bias, but I was still intrigued by what she had to say. However, I gave this 1 out of 5 stars. This is officially the worst book I read so far in 2023. This is honestly one of the most insulting autobiographies I have ever read, and it was extremely off-putting. So part of this book is obviously talking about the religion she grew up in, IBLP, and just going on a point-by-point basis of the basic life principles that she had to follow and then what that essentially entailed. There's a lot of rules, so I'm not going to go into it in this review because this video is already way too long, but I think the part that just bothered me so much is that she talks shit about man-made religion, which on the surface, yeah, I can agree with that. I have my gripes with man-made religion. The thing that gets me is that she left this man-made religion and then just joined another one. IBLP, and she does talk about this, you're not really worshiping God, you're worshiping a man who was Bill Gothard. And MacArthur, I'd argue, is the same thing. You're not worshiping God, you're worshiping the leader of that church.
I don't think I was getting my point across well enough, so I'm just jumping in here really quick just to try to attempt to make some things clearer. But basically what Ginger's actual point was that yes, we should not follow a man-made religion. We shouldn't worship a man, which was what you are doing in IBLP. You are essentially worshiping Bill Gothard. We should just be following the Bible because the Bible is the word of God, which I know that also opens up a can of worms about whether or not is it the word of God or is it the word of the men who wrote it? That's a argument for another day, but just to keep on topic here. But then what essentially bothers me is that she may think that, but in the MacArthur church, you still aren't worshiping a god. You are still essentially worshiping the Bill Gothard of the MacArthur church.
So regarding that, it's like you're either being hypocritical or don't truly see the irony of what you're saying. And that just bothered me. That put a very bad taste in my mouth. At one point, the thing that really pissed me off, at one point she said that people without faith are lost and not living meaningful lives. And I know so many people who don't have a religion and are living very meaningful lives. I'm living for myself, which I think is meaningful. I just think that's so insulting. Like, you want to be welcoming to people and then you say that. And there's just a lot of shady things about this book. Like, going back to the MacArthur thing, the ghostwriter works for that church, so that made me feel like this book, rather than being authentic, it's just being used as a conversion tool. And also just the people she's interviewing with. Like, she's interviewing with Girl Define and Kirk Cameron, both of which are extremely hateful, conservative people. Something that also bothered me about this book is she tried so hard to make her parents out to be these amazing people, and she says multiple times throughout the book, like, I don't want to trash them, I love my parents so much. This is just a personal nitpick, just because I didn't see what she was talking about. I don't understand why she loves her parents so much. I was so confused, because how are you going to trash this religion you were raised in and how it constantly scared you? And she even says it was instilled in her and she was afraid to go against it, but you love your parents who were doing the instilling. Is that a word? I don't even know if that was a word, but they were enforcing. They were doing the enforcing. So that didn't make sense to me, and it kind of just read like she was scared to talk shit about her parents. And I also just think her parents were terrible people. I can't stand her mom, and I think her dad skeeves me out. But it's also confusing because she is a victim of that environment, like Kid Ginger especially. She is a victim of that environment. She is a victim of her brother and how that was all handled by her parents. So it's like, I don't want to tell a victim how to feel. I was extremely uncomfortable whenever she spoke about her parents. I didn't like the moral of this autobiography. The moral just felt like you just need God and your problems will disappear. And I've already explained why I don't like that. I think you can live a meaningful life without a higher being. And it's just hard because, yes, I respect her for calling out the bad shit that Gothard was doing, but it's like you left that just to join something that's extremely similar. So it's just hard for me to take what she's saying seriously. But then, like, I'm thinking about, this is not in my notes, I'm thinking about it now. It's like, how much of this is her versus her ghostwriter? But also, like, she's out there spouting her book and advertising her book and being proud of it. So it's like, you're endorsing the shit your ghostwriter's writing. So yes, I am going to be mad at Ginger for that. And I think another thing that pissed me off a lot, actually, because she does mention this, she mentioned multiple times about how her religion would scare her and how she didn't want to do certain things because she thought if she didn't read her Bible, the whole family would die. If she didn't do this, it would send her into a panic attack. If she didn't do this, God would be angry. God would strike her down. If she didn't do that, someone's dying. And it just bothered me, her usage of the term overactive conscious. It angers me that she's not getting the mental health help that she needs, because Ginger, if you're watching this, which I highly doubt you are, but anyone, if you're going through similar stuff, Ginger, you don't have an overactive conscious. You have obsessive compulsive disorder. You have religion OCD, and I am saying that as someone with obsessive compulsive disorder, as someone with religious OCD. I call it Catholic guilt to be a joke and lighten the mood, but no, it's fucking religious OCD. I know it when I see it, and this is not her fault, because it's the fault of the religion that she's in, and that's why this pisses me off. She's not getting the mental health help she needs, and I truly, the more I learned about MacArthur, the more I truly think she left one dangerous man-made religion for another. And it's just, there's nothing different other than the fact that with Gothard she had to wear prairie dresses, and then with MacArthur she can hide in plain sight that she's part of some religious extremist cult. And she refused to call IBLP a cult, even though that's what we all know what it is. Did I just get pencil on my face? And to add salt to the wound, the way this book was written was very textbooky and made it boring and lagged, so it didn't even have an entertaining writing style. But you know what? At least she thanked the ghostwriter. She does thank the ghostwriter before you start the book, and like, I've never really seen that before. All that is to say, this book pissed me off. I I'm glad I read it so I can form my own opinion, and that way if the subject ever comes up, I can actually talk from someone who read the source material and I'm not just talking out of my ass. But at the same time, this book really, really pissed me off. And I don't recommend it. I'm gonna kick myself in the ass for being so fucking nosy about shit like this. I knew this book was gonna anger me, and I still read it, so I have no one to blame but myself. And I'm getting really worked up about this book, so let's move on to a book I actually did like and gave 5 out of 5 stars. And that is They Cage the Animals at Night by Jennings Michael Birch. This is another autobiography and is about a boy who grew up in the foster care system. These books always destroy me, so I don't really have an objective opinion about this. These books are usually like an automatic 5 out of 5. I feel like this memoir really opens up the horrors of the American foster care system and being poor. So Jennings' father is out of the picture. But his mother was in the picture, and oftentimes something would happen to her that would send these kids to foster care, and it was a lot of back and forth, and it was really hard for me to be mad at the mom. And I don't even think the author wants you to be mad at his mother, but I personally could not be mad at her just because of her circumstances. She was a single mom to a multitude of kids, and she didn't really have a well-paying job, and her husband wasn't helping her. So this woman was just on her own, had way too much on her plate, and had absolutely no help. And mind you, this memoir takes place in like the 50s, 60s, I want to believe. And if women are struggling now, I cannot imagine how hard it was back then especially. So you can't even be mad at her, and it's just part of the horrors of being poor. And when it comes to the horrors of the foster care system, it makes you question why some people are allowed around kids. He met many nuns at these places because a lot of foster care systems, especially back in the day, were Catholic based. And Catholic nuns, I don't know what it is about them, but they're either the nicest people you've ever met or the most evil people you've ever met. There is never an in-between when it comes to nuns, and he came across a lot of evil ones that would just beat him. And there was nothing he could do about it. There was really nothing the police could do about it because the nuns were part of that order, and it's not like the order disagreed with those nuns. And then there was also a family where, and this is very common back in the day, there was also a family where the only reason they were doing foster care was because of the money involved. And that sucks. Like, these people aren't taking you in because they love you and want to give you a good life. They're taking you in because you're giving them money. And they ended up treating him like garbage. Where in contrast, there was actually another family who did adore him for who he was and really wanted to help. And they had to fight tooth and nail just to get him to stay over one night. But then, even then, it was a whole debacle because for some reason this guy wasn't allowed to keep him for the time being until his mom got better. And it's horrible. Like, here's someone who's obviously good with kids, and why is he not allowed to take care of him, but the woman who's beating his ass is? It's an unfortunate part of the foster care system that a lot of people are still dealing with today. This book made me cry multiple times, which is always a sign of a good memoir. If a memoir can make me bawl my eyes out in multiple sittings, it's an automatic high rating for me. I highly recommend this one. This was a really good one. Next we have Demon Slayer Volume 3. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars because my least favorite character was introduced. This guy, I cannot stand him. He's better to handle in the manga because I'm not hearing his voice because he's constantly fucking screaming in the anime. And this also contains one of my least favorite arcs. Next I read Tokyo Ghoul Days. This is the first book in the light novel series of Tokyo Ghoul. Tokyo Ghoul is a manga that I was reading throughout 2020 and 2021. And it takes place in a universe where ghouls run amok. Ghouls are scary because they can disguise themselves as humans, however, they can only eat human flesh. And then one day our main character Kaneki has an organ transplant and he becomes half human and half ghoul, and now his new goal is to make these two species coexist. So we have Tokyo Ghoul Days, which is just a bunch of short stories that take place mostly within the manga timeline. About, I think only 2 stories take place before then. I went into this really excited because I love Tokyo Ghoul and I just finished that horrendous anime adaptation, so I was hoping the light novels can kind of get me back into like the original writing I was hoping for. However, it is a different author. So Sui Ishida is the author of the manga, And then Shin Towada is the author of these light novels. And it's just really hard to talk about because some of these short stories I liked more than others. Some I didn't like at all. And then my biggest gripe with this is that there is more telling than showing. They would just list a bunch of action, but then none of the internal monologue that made the original manga so great was in this novel. And it is most of these stories are told just through dialogue, so they're really, I shouldn't even say there's a lot of action. It's just dialogue, and some things feel out of character for some characters. One thing I do really like though is despite the short stories being their own thing, they all do connect in some way. You can read the short stories by themselves, like you could read the fourth story in here without reading the first, but there are small things that connect them all, and I did think that was really cool. And then in the end, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read Demon Slayer Volume 4, and I gave this 4.75 out of 5 stars. My 2 favorite characters in the series are introduced at this point. This is also the start of my favorite arc from the anime. And at this point, the author is starting to find her footing when it comes to the plot itself, and also the action. The action does not feel as choppy as the earlier volumes, and she's getting a lot better with that. And also the artwork. I am obsessed with her character designs. And then I read Demon Slayer Volume 5, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. Everything I said about Volume 4, I could say for this one. The reason this is a full 5 out of 5 is because this made me cry. I had tears streaming down my face reading the demons' backstories. If you know me, I am a sucker for a sympathetic villain, sympathetic antagonist, what have you. And that's one of the reasons I love Demon Slayer so much. Like, despite the plot being something I have seen before, the majority of the antagonists do have a backstory that you can sympathize with. And I'm a sucker for that, so I am obsessed. And I got to see more of my favorite character. We always love that. And then the last book I read, I literally finished this on March 31st, is Go Down Together, The True Untold Story of Bonnie and Clyde by Jeff Gwynne. If you don't know who Bonnie and Clyde are, they are some of America's most famous criminals from back during the Depression era, so about the 1930s. And they're famous for a lot of robberies and some murders, but this book delves into like the actual truth of their lifestyle, because it turns out media throughout the years heavily romanticized Bonnie and Clyde and made them out to be better than what they were, and this delves into exactly who they were as people. I really enjoyed myself reading this book. I don't have anything to say about the writing technique because I was just enjoying what I was learning too much. This is one of my favorite books of the year. Could be recency bias, but we'll just ignore that. Like I said, Bonnie and Clyde were heavily romanticized throughout the years and even during their own time. So I had this idea of Bonnie and Clyde. Going into this book, I fully expected them to be like in their 30s. I thought their crime spree lasted a lot longer than it did, and I just thought they did more with themselves. Turns out they were younger than I am now when they died. Bonnie and Clyde were like 20, 23, 24 respectively. Their crime spree lasted less than 2 years, and the biggest thing I learned from this book, and then the book, that's essentially what the whole book is about, is that they actually sucked ass at being criminals. They were terrible at their jobs. I'm thinking they pulled off these great big bank heists, they stole a bunch of money, killed a lot of people. Turns out most of their killings were mainly accidents. They never really set out to kill people, and they didn't have these great bank heists at all. Like most of what they stole was from like tiny convenience stores and what have you, and they were constantly poor. Their main thing was car theft, but like a car is not going to get you money. You know, they would steal cars to drive away from their failed bank robberies. But however, that didn't disappoint me. If anything, that made me more intrigued by their story, because to me, I was like, oh my god, you're an uncool criminal. But I love a good story about an uncool criminal. And you know, I read this just in time for Women's History Month, because really the reason Bonnie and Clyde are famous is because of Bonnie's existence. For the longest time, Clyde was just a local criminal, just like localized in Texas, and if anything, he was just another scrawny white guy. But it was Bonnie who really put them on the map, because back in the day, it wasn't really common for women to follow along with their criminal husbands like that. And if they were, the public kind of just perceived them as not in their right mind. They weren't doing it because they wanted to. Their husbands forced them to do it, or they weren't smart. They just didn't know any better. However, photos leaked of Bonnie and Clyde, and they say these photos are the reason why the whole country knows them, because for the longest time the two of them were only famous in like Texas and Oklahoma. But these photos got out of Bonnie, and there's a photo of her holding a gun with a cigar in her mouth, which was blasphemous for a woman to do at the time. And that photo is essentially what got people to think that maybe she is part of this gang and is making these choices herself, with, you know, no guy forcing her to do it. So that got the public intrigued, and especially back then during the Depression era. And that's actually why Bonnie and Clyde got so romanticized too, because people wanted entertainment, so rather than writing the truth, newspapers would greatly exaggerate their stories, and people just thought it was so fun that there was a criminal running around with a woman too. And that's essentially what separated Bonnie and Clyde from everyone else, and the public loved them. And I just think it's so funny that it's a woman. The reason it's funny, because the book talks about how much Clyde wanted to be the leader. He was the leader of the Barrel Gang, not Bonnie. He was the mastermind, but at the end of the day, and to this day, we know them because of a woman. Just in time for Women's History Month, and I love that for her. And another reason I love this biography so much is because of how sympathetic it made Bonnie and Clyde. I said before, I love a good sympathetic villain antagonist, and yes, these are real people, but they were kind of antagonists for their time. It really delves into their childhoods. Clyde grew up Bonnie did too, but Clyde more so grew up extremely poor. This book would talk about multiple times how they would steal money, or there were instances where they realized who they were stealing from, so they would give the money back. And again, it was the Great Depression, so oftentimes with the money they did have, if they had enough to spare, they would bring it to their families to help them. And then when it got to describing how they died, now that I know their whole history, I felt really bad that they died. There was a part of the book where the author was talking about that Bonnie's scream was so bad it haunted the cops for the rest of their lives, and that has to be a scary scream. Like, it made me feel so bad for her. So the fact that this biography got me to feel bad for these people, that's one of the reasons it's one of my favorites. And I'm kind of repeating myself here, but I really do like learning the real Bonnie and Clyde and how they contrast to media portrayals. And I just think it's just so interesting that they were highly romanticized during their day when their hearts were still beating, and to this day they're still romanticized. That this book was like, I felt like I was learning, despite knowing who Bonnie and Clyde were, reading this book, I felt like I was learning about two totally different people. So I had a lot of fun with this. This is one of the best biographies I ever read, and now I want to go on a Bonnie and Clyde road trip. That's another way to make your biographies one of my favorite books. If it makes me want to travel, that means I really enjoyed what you talked about, and now I want to see the things Bonnie and Clyde saw. And I really want to see their car, because I know their car is on display in, I think, Las Vegas. And those were all the books I completed. There are 2 books I started reading but have not finished. One is Paradise Lost by John Milton. I am halfway through this. The other one is Tokyo Ghoul Void. I have about 100 pages left. And that is it for this video. This raw footage is long, and my throat feels so scratchy right now. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. Let me know down below your thoughts, any of the books you read, if you have a favorite, what have you. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Y'all know the drill. And without further ado, I'm gonna peace out, and I'll see you guys later. Ciao, tutti.